Well, we all know the old story. The man who was out for a walk on a foggy day and didn't see the edge of a precipice over which he proceeded to fall. And the drop was hundreds of feet. And by fortune, the man managed to grab hold of a limb sticking out of the side of the cliff and was left there hanging. And after a moment of hanging there, he proceeded to yell up at the top, "Is anybody up there? Is anybody up there?" And silence for a moment. "Is anybody up there?" And suddenly from the clouds came this great voice, "It is I, the Lord, who speaks to you." And the man kept hanging, and he said, thank God you're up there. Can you help me? Can you help me?" "Yes, I can help you." "Please help me." "Yes, I can help you. Let go of the branch, and I will bear thee up." The man held on to the branch for a moment, looked up again, and said, "Is there anybody else up there?" It's no fun to fall. It's no fun to be in a position where you have to rely upon someone else to catch you. It's no fun realizing that the fortune that has come your way has sometimes come at the rescuing hands of another, someone who was there to catch you. We prefer to build a narrative about ourselves that suggests that we have been the master of our own fate, that we have done life our way, that we have pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps and become self-made women and self-made men, that everything has come our way, has come because we've earned it. Now, of course, like most things, this is partly true. Most, if not all of us, can point to work we've done and accomplishments we've achieved as a result of applying our wills, our minds, our energy, our determination. We are free agents who control pieces of our destiny. We chose the right road, we say. We landed the important contract. We stayed late at the office. We exercised extra elbow grease. We like to think that what has come our way has come from using our noggins, applying our wise judgment, and giving our 110%. Now, as I said, this is partly true, and what stems from this realization is the feeling of pride. We're proud of the things that we have accomplished, and there's nothing wrong with pride. There's nothing wrong about feeling good about what you've done. There's nothing wrong with taking satisfaction with the result of your hard work. Probably not enough people who take enough pride in what they've done. A healthy dose of pride is good for the soul. But pride alone is not all of what life is about, because the truth is, life is also full of falls. Life has its climbs, and life has its falls. Life has its summits, and life has its plummets. And in those plummets, there have been along the way hands to catch us. On June 8, 1958, a Sunday, my father got up and got dressed to go to church to lead Sunday worship. He was a pastor. On the way to church, he dropped off my mother at the hospital, for the time came for her to be delivered of moi. She was in labor with me. So he dropped her off at the hospital, proceeded to the church, led 2 worship services, preached 2 sermons based upon the text, "Deliver us from evil." I'm not quite sure what that was all about. Drove back to the hospital and waited in the waiting room for the doctor to come tell him the good news. Such were the olden days, and with those olden days came this confidence on the part of my father that my mother and the child she was delivering, they were in good hands. And sure enough, at 4:44 that afternoon, out I fell into someone's good hands. It might have been Dr. Flannery's hands, our family doctor, but someone's hands caught me when I fell into the world. And I didn't earn those good hands. I didn't, call in advance to reserve those good hands. They were just there to catch me and maybe even slap me a little on the behind, though I don't remember. You have the same story, of course. Maybe you were never told the details, but we all have a story of those moments leading up to our first breath, falling into someone's good hands. In fact, we have a whole chapter of life of which we have little memory. Those first few years when all we pretty much did was fall into the good hands of someone else, moms and dads and brothers and sisters and grandmothers and grandfathers, passing the little likes of you and me from one set of arms to another. When we cried, someone picked us up. When we fell, someone swooped us up and told us it was going to be all right. And none of this was because we deserved it or earned it. It was all grace. Later, we may have fallen into the good hands of an employer or a mentor or a family friend. Later than that, we may have fallen into the good hands of a teacher or a coach or an instructor. Later than that, we may have fallen into the good hands of a spouse. But the truth is, we have been falling all of our lives. And by grace, there have been those moments when someone's good hands have been there to catch us. Maybe you remember the story that took place in the first part of last century when the great concert pianist Ignacy Paderewski was invited by a couple of students at Stanford University to give a concert at their campus. It was a plot, really, on the part of these two students to raise enough money for themselves to help pay their tuition, which they couldn't afford. Well, the great Paderewski agreed to come for a fee of $2,000, and he came and performed a wonderful concert. And when the concert was over, the two students showed up backstage and with forlorn faces informed the great pianist that they had only raised $1,600 in ticket sales. They were $400 short and hadn't even paid the expenses. They handed a check worth $1,600 and gave it to the pianist and asked if it was at all possible if they could give him an IOU for the $400 that they could then work to earn that money and send it to him when he returned to Europe. Paderewski thought for a moment and then in front of the students took the $1,600 check and tore it in two and said, "I'm sorry you didn't raise the money, boys, but I'll tell you what. Take the $1,600, pay your expenses, and keep the rest." Years later, after Paderewski had returned to his native Poland, World War I broke out, and in its aftermath, much of Europe laid waste. And Paderewski had since been elected prime minister and was preparing himself to intervene with the United States to assist in helping to feed his starving Polish and European countrymen. But prior to his trip, President Herbert Hoover made the decision to open all the storehouses of the U.S. and to ship food to Poland and to Europe so that the people could be fed. And Paderewski made the trip to the U.S. to thank the president for the gracious act of humanitarian aid. "What can we ever do to repay you?" Paderewski asked. Hoover waved the question aside and reminded the great pianist that he was one of the two Stanford students whose debt he had forgiven long before. In the end, we all find ourselves falling, and by grace, we fall into good hands. So there's an interesting thing that happens with the language in the New Testament, the language through which the writers tell us the good news of Jesus. The New Testament, of course, was originally written in the Greek, and it turns out that the Greek word for grace is the same word for joy. Chara or charis is the word used interchangeably in the New Testament for grace and joy, as if to say that grace and joy are two sides of the same coin. That you really can't pull these two apart. That if you're going to experience joy, it will come through your appreciation of grace. That as proud as you might be in what you've been able to do, the real joy comes in realizing what has been done for you. As much as you pulled yourself up, how many times still has someone had to catch you in your fall? By grace, the apostle writes, we have been saved. By grace, we've been caught. By grace, we've been borne up by the good hands. That from the very beginning, when God breathed us into existence, it was by grace that we took our first breath, and it's by grace that we have made it thus far. And most importantly, it's by grace that we can look ahead and know and believe that when we've fallen for the last time, when we have fallen into that eternal slumber, it is the good hands of grace that catch us and the eternal arms that swoop us into God's loving presence. By his great mercy, writes the apostle, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. A new birth. The old birth had us falling into the good hands of the doctor. The new birth has us falling into the hands of the Savior. Although you have not seen him, Peter continues, you love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy. An indescribable joy. The grace of the good hands turns into the joy of thanksgiving. We look behind us and we see the good hands that caught us, and we look ahead and we see the good hands that will catch us. And that's where the joy begins. I've never won the lottery. I suppose you have to play it first to win it. But it seems that the early apostles felt like they had won the lottery, that they had come to learn that the God of creation had graciously accepted them, had graciously promised them that when they fell back, there would be one, this Jesus, there to catch them. That by grace they had heard the news, and by grace they had been accepted, and now the rest for them was just joy. Which I suppose is what brings the world together today on World Communion Sunday. Oh, there is much that pulls this weary old world apart. There is so much that divides us. There are too many opinions and polls and politics to drive wedges and walls, and it just does not seem to be much joy. For all those politicians' promises, they can't seem to deliver joy, and they never will, because joy comes by grace. Joy comes by being grateful for the good catch, for the good hands, for the good God we know in Jesus. It makes me think of the story of Nicholas Winton. Nicholas Winton was a stockbroker in England back in the late 1930s and was growing concerned over the developments in Germany with the rise of the Third Reich. And after the Nazis marched into Czechoslovakia, Winton traveled to Czechoslovakia to see if there was anything he could do to help his fellow Jews who were growing more and more concerned over their future plight. He realized that what he could do was that he could help Jewish parents get their children out of the country and to safety. So he returned to England with the names of hundreds of Jewish children and appealed to the government to let him rescue these children from their most certain demise. And from the government, he received permission, and he arranged for hundreds of English families to adopt these children, and in the end, organized the safe transport of 669 children to the safety of Great Britain. When all was said and done, and all those children were safely in protection with all those English families, Mr. Winton closed up his files, packed them up away in an attic, and never spoke of what he did ever again. 40 years later, the word got out, and the BBC arranged to have Mr. Winton in attendance at a live variety show, and unbeknownst to him had arranged for dozens and dozens and dozens of the children, now adults, to be in attendance too, surrounding him, unbeknownst to him, in the audience. And then came the moment of truth, when, to Mr. Winton's surprise, the host of the show asked if there was anyone in the audience who owed their lives to this man, Mr. Winton. And the dozens and the dozens and the dozens stood, surrounding the man in whose good hands they had fallen. And those were just the dozens that could be there. There were 669 in total. And when they did the math and considered the children and the grandchildren of those 669 that today now owe their life to Nicholas Winton, the total comes to be around 6,000. And maybe that's the math we get to do when we come to this table, the World Communion table, that the one who graced us with our birth is the one who graced all with their birth. And the one who catches us whenever we fall is the one who catches all when they fall. The Savior with a multitude of children. And all the children gather around the host, and at table express their great joy of grace, remembering their new birth, remembering the good catch, remembering the joy of just being human, remembering the grace of the good hands that have caught us, and remembering the joy of being caught again.